So this video is completely demonetized. What a surprise. It doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter what I censor, or the fact that this video contains only historical information and educational information. YouTube refuses to allow me to monetize this video. And since it's been about a month now that I haven't been able to monetize a video, I would really like to ask any of you out there who are in the position to perhaps consider supporting me through Patreon or one of the other links down below. Of course, I'm not e-begging here and I don't expect anything. All of you who watch my videos and share my videos are supporting me more than I could ever ask, and I'm eternally grateful. But to make up for asking this and asking you to consider, please accept this clip of a pole dancer that I've in Beijing. I happen to be doing some research about why China seems to put out this image of being all pure and banning pornography and all that kind of thing, but the fact that, you know, prostitution and this kind of thing is out in the open, it kind of goes completely against that. That's why I took that clip. That was the only reason, not because I'm a pervert or anything. High school life in China's most advanced and progressive city involves what you'd expect: a heavy focus on education, making friends, and of course, the all-important school outings. So the government of China wants to make China shit again. Now hey there guys, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here, it's just that a country that I personally witnessed go through so much positive change has for the last good 5-6 years been going backwards. And all the good positive change that I saw happening in China is undoing itself, and unfortunately it's falling back into the bad China, the awful China, the China that existed before you even knew about it, the China that existed in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the China that was broken, the China that was hollowed by this awful Communist Party bullshit, this awful famine-promoting, corrupt, morally vacuous system of government that chewed its people up and spat them out. And as the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party approaches rapidly, the CCP is rewriting history. The government of China is trying to whitewash all the bad things that happened under its leadership in the past in order to hold on to power. What made China what it is today? Was it this? Was it this? Was it this? Or was it this? No, this, and this led to this. What made China what it is today was him, her, them, and of course, cooperating with the West, opening up, allowing investment in the West, actively cancelling the core of what the Communist Party is all about in the first place. You know, allowing Western capitalism in to save the day and lift China out of stagnation and poverty. That's what made China great. The whole point of my video today is this disturbing thing that I've been seeing, and something I noticed in China ramping up right before I left as well. And that is, for some godforsaken reason, a lot of Chinese people have this idea in their minds that the bad old days of communism, you know, the days what you saw in some of that footage where people are walking around with those little mouse suits with a red star and, you know, that whole communist purge nonsense and all the little red books and all that, they see that as a point of power, a point of success of China, the identity of China. The fact of the matter is that terrible time and that government leadership led to the worst stuff that China's ever seen and has terrorized the citizens of China for decades. The ramping up to this 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China has seen, like you saw in the beginning with that school outing where they all went to go and sing communist songs and dress up in the old communist uniforms and things. We've seen a lot of this, okay? And people are glorifying the past, and the Communist Party is very effectively and has very effectively whitewashed history. To the point now where people think that it was the Communist Party of China that saved China from Japan. And I'm going to have to give you a quick crash course here on history, because it's certainly, if you've lived in China, you wouldn't know about it. If you're living there, you wouldn't know about it. If you're Chinese, you don't know about it either. But the Communist Party claims victory over Japan as if they're the ones that saved China from the Japanese invasion. For those of you guys out there who are not quite sure as to what happened, of course, during World War II, the Japanese invaded China and they did atrocious things there. The Nanjing Massacre, all sorts of terrible experiments and terrible things that they did to the people there, inexcusable things. And Japan was running wild, completely decimating China. But the people that fought back, the Chinese people that fought back, were the KMT, the Nationalist Party. They were the rulers of China at the time. The Communist Party, the Mao Zedong and his group of revolutionaries did very little to fight the Japanese. In fact, almost nothing. If they didn't, it's insignificant what they did. In fact, I got some stats here for you guys. Let's take a look. Of the 23 major battles, where both sides employed at least a regiment, how many of those 23 major battles was the CCP the main force opposing the Japanese? The answer to that is 0. Okay, of the 23 major battles where both sides employed at least a regiment, in how many was the CCP a minor participant? The answer to that one is 1. One of those major battles had 1,000 to 1,500 CCP troops, and it was a security detachment on one of the flanks, that's all. Of the 1,117 significant engagements, how many were fought by the CCP? And the answer to that is 1. And of the 40,000 odd skirmishes, how many were fought by the CCP? Okay, the answer to that is 200 out of 40,000. The CCP and the communists hid out in the mountains, while the nationalists fought the Japanese with the aid of the West. And this is another thing that keeps getting whitewashed, is the fact that the Allies helped China tremendously during this time by sending aid, ammunition, money. You can look at the old war posters where, there's all this propaganda saying China is our friend and our ally, help support China, he is fighting the evils of, the Axis and all that kind of stuff, and raise war bonds for them and things. Never mind all the airdrops that were dropped into China and all that. And let's not forget the maybe slightly insignificant part of this story, and that is that the Allies nuked Japan into surrender. And that, in no small part, played a role in the fact that China does not currently belong to Japan. Anyway, what happened was the communists, those guys you see with their little red hats, like all the children are dressing up, as they hid in the mountains and waited for everything to die down, and then came down and engaged in a civil war against the nationalists who were already obliterated by the Japanese. And then they mopped up and claimed victory. And in fact, Mao Zedong himself thanked the leaders of Japan later. There's a time when he visited, or they visited, and there's a quote, and it's public knowledge. He thanked them. He said that if it wasn't for Japan invading China, the communists would never have risen to power. So, we're talking about a real scumbag here. So, the CCP did nothing to defeat the Japanese. Although, living in China, you wouldn't think so, because every day on the TV, they've got those War of the Resistance, war fantasy dramas that show, the communist rebels, like a little ragtag group of communist rebels kind of destroying the Japanese with kung fu and throwing bricks at them and using bows and arrows and stuff. It's actually quite embarrassing, to be honest, but it's on every day. Anyway, that's one of the big things. The Communist Party also has this way of whitewashing all the atrocities that they did. This famine, this great famine of China that lasted about 3 to 4 years, from around about 1959 to 1961, thereabouts. I blurred out the pictures because I can't show them to you, and the reason for that is it's atrocious. That's when we had all the cannibalism, people, like tens of millions of people dying of starvation. People selling their children off as food, people having to watch their relatives die in front of them and not have the power to move to take the dead body out the house and watch the rats eat them and to eat their eyeballs out and stuff. There's lots of testimonials. That is a direct result of Mao Zedong's failed, stupid policies where it was all about getting people together and setting up these communes to produce grain and incentivizing them to produce more. Okay, so what happened was corruption set in, and the heads of those communes would say, oh, we can produce this much. And then the next one will say, no, we can produce this much. And then when they didn't reach that target, they lied about it and said that they did. And so as a result, the Communist Party would come and take all the grain away, thinking that they made, say, 10,000 tons of grain, and they'd take like 5,000 tons of grain away, and that would have been the most amount that they had made. Anyway, it led to a lot of grain being exported, rotting in storehouses and stuff, while the peasants and the farmers starved. All these stupid things about creating steel, where everyone just melted down all their tools and pots and cut down all of the trees to use as fire and fuel. And when they run out of trees, they start to burn their doors, their window frames, digging up coffins to burn the wood, that kind of nonsense. It destroyed China, okay, this nonsense that the Communist Party put them through. But these years of great famine where tens of millions of people died has been whitewashed by the Communist Party, and they say it was a bad weather phenomenon. There was drought and a lot of flooding, and it's not anyone's fault. Meanwhile, if you look at the weather records, it was actually very mild during those years. And again, it seems like people have a very short history because they seem to think that Mao Zedong's this great leader and this great man, whereas, in fact, he wasn't really. This funny situation is something I noticed almost straight away when I got to China. Children and their parents will like to dress them up for photo shoots and stuff in these sort of communist outfits, the sort of whole red star and all that, a gun. You've got themed restaurants that are set up with the whole communist theme, where they kind of glorify the Long March and all this kind of thing. It's everywhere. It's just bizarre that people still accept it. It's bizarre that people somehow think that it was a good thing for China. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't that terrible Communist Party, the one that still runs it today. It wasn't the Communist Party that saved China. It wasn't the Communist Party that made China great. It was abolishing the core of the Communist Party, which is, of course, communism and socialism, and accepting Western capitalism that made China great. It was Deng Xiaoping, the same guy, unfortunately, who ordered the tanks in on the Tiananmen Square protests, and the Tiananmen Square massacre we all know is real. But of course, that's another thing that the Chinese Communist Party has whitewashed out of history, because according to them, no shots were ever fired. And if you meet a person that's fresh off the boat from China and you ask them about Tiananmen Square, what happened there, they won't know anything other than the fact that, there were a couple of rowdy students and they were wrong, and they were causing trouble, and so they were kind of just dealt with and everything's okay. It's tough when you've got so many Chinese friends and family, and you know that this blatant ignorance is peddled and encouraged, and this brainwashing that goes on with this awful government. But yeah, back to the whole thing. It was in 1979/1980 when Deng Xiaoping, who, like I said, the leader who let the tanks in on Tiananmen, he realized he'd have to open up, and he did. He opened up to the West. And he did that in the city that I lived in for so long, in China, for 14 years. It was the first special economic zone. It was the first part of China that could freely trade with the West, where factories could get set up, where investments could happen. And it was right next to Hong Kong, so it was the perfect place because, you just get everything into Hong Kong. It ships around the world because Hong Kong is an international shipping hub, of course, and it's an international financial hub and all that kind of thing. So it worked incredibly well. Money flowed into China. Investments flowed into China. And we all know the rest of the story. Everybody and their dog got a factory going or invested in producing products in China rather than in their own domestic market because the labor costs were so low. And it was a bit of a Wild West. You know, you could get away with all sorts of things in China that you would never be able to do in a Western country, like skirt environmental laws, for instance, and not have to worry about the sort of smog output of your factory or the chemicals that leak out into the environment and that kind of thing. And, you know, it was a lot of the West taking advantage of China, for sure. I'm not trying to be on this whole the West is best kind of thing here. The West and all countries around the world took advantage of China, but it was China opening up that allowed China to grow. The Communist Party of China, of course, claims victory over this too. And the Communist Party of China is the one who says, we lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And of course, people always forget that it was the Communist Party of China that plunged those 800 million people into poverty in the first place. Because if they had not put forth these stupid policies that ended up in the deaths and the destruction, destroying Chinese history and culture and all that kind of nonsense, China would have, just like Taiwan, you can look at Taiwan as a litmus test because the same people from the same time period went to a little island and they prospered and they grew into something fantastic. China would very possibly be the same. Very great, would have kept its fantastic, excellent culture. It's, you know, however many hundreds or however many thousands of years of culture, that's always a debate. But it certainly wouldn't be this hollowed out 72 years of culture country like it is today. Glorifying this terrible communist party that we currently see, glorifying this silly situation where people are going out there and wearing the clothes and the old mouse suits and waving the flags and pretending that the Communist Party is so amazing and great. This is a step backwards. This is going back to the old days of China, the bad days of China. And I hate to see this happening in front of my eyes because there is nothing to glorify from that period. There is nothing of value that came from Mao Zedong's leadership. As much as they've hammered that into the people of China to say that the new China would not exist if it wasn't for this terrible man who went forth and unified the country and made the new China. That's what they tell everyone. They say if it wasn't for this Communist Party and for this guy, China wouldn't exist. Well, that's bullshit. China would have existed, and China would have been better if it wasn't for them. And it was working with the West that made China great and what it is today. But now, the Communist Party of China wants to glorify its shady past, whitewash all the bad stuff, and say that working with the West is not good, and that they should close off again and kind of try and do their own thing. And it's not the correct thing. It's not the correct way to go. So yes, right now, the Communist Party of China wants to make China shit again. If you're Chinese, or if you live in China, or if you're in the position to do anything, I hope that you ignore this Communist Party glorification nonsense, and I hope that you work towards making China great again. Stay awesome.